It was a crisp Tuesday morning in the exclusive enclave of Silverleaf when 72-year-old Arthur Pendleton shuffled to the curb with the trash, only to be intersected by his insomniac neighbor, Martha, whose face was etched with genuine concern as she whispered, "I need to tell you something important, Arthur. Your wife and your son are hiding something from you." In that instant, the facade of the frail old man vanished, and Arthur secretly installed hidden surveillance throughout his estate. However, when he reviewed the footage later that night, the air left his lungs at the shocking sight of who appeared on the screen. His heart shattered, yet the grief was quickly replaced by the icy precision of a forensic accountant, for soon enough, he would make them repay every cent of the debt they had accrued through years of deceit, with interest. The video file played in silence at first. Arthur sat in the heavy leather chair of his study, a room that smelled of mahogany and old dust. He adjusted his spectacles, his hand trembling slightly, not from the age or the condition everyone claimed he had, but from a mixture of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated horror. The timestamp on the bottom right corner of the screen indicated it was yesterday evening, just 40 minutes after Arthur had retired to bed with his nightly glass of warm milk, prepared lovingly by his wife, Eleanor. On the high-definition screen, the living room of his Silverleaf estate looked like a stage set for a tragedy he never knew he was starring in. The door opened. It was not a thief. It was not an intruder with a mask. It was Dr. Julian Thorne. Julian, the man who had treated Arthur for 15 years. The man who checked his blood pressure every Friday and joked about handicap on the golf course. Julian walked in with the confidence of a man who owned the place. He did not sneak. He strode. And there, rising from the velvet sofa to meet him, was Eleanor. Arthur watched, his breath hitching in a throat that suddenly felt too tight. Eleanor did not greet Julian with a handshake. She melted into his arms. The kiss was not tentative. It was hungry, familiar, and practiced. It lasted for 12 seconds. Arthur counted. He counted because counting was the only thing that kept him from screaming. 1, 2, 3. He watched his wife of 30 years claw at the back of his doctor's jacket. Arthur reached for the volume knob, his fingers stiff. He turned it up. The audio from the hidden camera in the chandelier was crystal clear. "He is asleep," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a purr that Arthur had not heard directed at him in a decade. "I gave him the double dose. He will be out until noon tomorrow." Julian laughed, a low, rumbling sound that Arthur used to find comforting. "The old fool," Julian said, walking over to the liquor cabinet. Arthur watched as Julian reached for the bottle of Macallan 25, the bottle Arthur was saving for his 75th birthday. Julian poured 2 generous glasses. "Does he suspect anything?" "He suspects nothing," Eleanor replied, taking the glass. She twirled a lock of her hair, a gesture she used to do when she was flirting with Arthur back when she was a 25-year-old model and he was a 45-year-old titan of industry. "He thinks his mind is going." Today he dropped his coffee cup because his hands were shaking so bad. "I told him it was just part of the progression." Arthur looked down at his own hands resting on the desk. They were still. They were perfectly still. The shaking earlier that morning, the fog in his brain, the lethargy that made lifting a newspaper feel like lifting a brick, it was not Parkinson's. It was not dementia. "It is the medication," Julian said on the screen, taking a sip of the expensive scotch. "The benzodiazepine cocktail I prescribed creates excellent symptoms. Tremors, confusion, memory loss. Give it another 6 months, Eleanor. By his next birthday, he will be legally incompetent. We can put him in that facility in Tucson and taking control of the trust will be a matter of paperwork. 6 months, Eleanor sighed, leaning her head on Julian's shoulder. It feels like an eternity. He is just so, lingering. Arthur froze. The word hung in the air of his dark study. Lingering. As if he were a bad smell. As if he were a stain on the carpet that refused to wash out. He watched them toast. They clinked the crystal glasses, his crystal glasses, and drank to his demise. They drank to his madness. They drank to the fortune they planned to strip from his cooling corpse. The grief hit him first. It was a physical blow, a punch to the solar plexus that doubled him over in the chair. Tears pricked his eyes, hot and stinging. He thought of the vacations in Paris. He thought of the nights he held Eleanor when she claimed to be afraid of the thunder. He thought of the trust he placed in Julian's hands every time he swallowed a pill. It was all a lie. A massive, architectural construct of deceit built on the foundation of his own gullibility. But then, something shifted. It happened in the span of a heartbeat. The weeping old man died in that chair. The loving husband evaporated. In his place, the machine whirred to life. Arthur Pendleton sat up straight. The spine that usually curved under the weight of feigned frailty snapped into alignment. He wiped the single tear from his cheek and looked at the moisture on his fingertip as if it were a rounding error in a ledger. He did not throw the monitor. He did not storm downstairs to confront them with a golf club. That would be emotional. That would be messy. Arthur did not do messy. Arthur did audits. He opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a fresh legal pad. He uncapped his fountain pen. The nib hovered over the paper for a fraction of a second before descending. Subject, Eleanor Pendleton. Subject, Julian Thorne. Liability, infinite. He began to write. He logged the time, 10:14 p.m. He logged the quote, legally incompetent. He logged the admission of poisoning, benzodiazepine cocktail. He wrote with a speed and precision that defied his age. His mind, supposedly rotting away, was sharpening into a blade. He analyzed the conversation on the screen not as a betrayal, but as a fraudulent transaction. They were embezzling his life. They were laundering his sanity. He looked at the bottle of pills sitting on the corner of his desk. The label read, "Take one daily for cognitive support." Dr. Thorne. Arthur reached out and picked up the orange bottle. He did not flush them down the toilet. That would be destroying evidence. Instead, he opened the bottle, took out a single blue pill, and placed it in a small plastic bag he retrieved from his chaotic drawer of old office supplies. He labeled the bag with the date and time. Then, he put the bottle back exactly where it had been, turned the label to the exact angle it had faced before. On the screen, Eleanor and Julian had moved to the sofa. Arthur watched. He did not look away. He forced himself to witness every touch, every kiss, every moment of their mockery. He needed the anger. He needed to calculate the exact depth of the knife in his back so he could determine the force required to pull it out and stab it back in. This was no longer a marriage. This was a crime scene. And Arthur was the lead investigator. He glanced at the family portrait on the wall, the one taken 5 years ago. Eleanor, smiling. Lucas, looking bored. Himself, looking proud. He realized now that he was the only one in the photo who didn't know the joke. The video ended at 2 in the morning when Julian finally left. Eleanor locked the door and went upstairs, presumably to sleep in the bed next to the man she was slowly murdering. Arthur closed the laptop. He sat in the darkness, the silence of the large house pressing in on him. He felt cold, but it was a good cold. It was the cold of a vault. It was the cold of absolute clarity. They wanted a frail, senile old man. Tomorrow, he would give them the performance of a lifetime. He would be the perfect fool. He would stumble. He would shake. He would forget names. He would play the part until the curtain fell, and when it did, he would bring the entire theater down on top of their heads. He picked up his pen one last time and wrote a single line at the bottom of the page. Audit status, commenced. He stood up, his legs steady, his heart a block of ice, and walked out of the study to prepare for the role of the victim, knowing that in the end, he would be the executioner. The morning sun sliced through the French windows of the breakfast nook, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air like microscopic spies. Arthur Pendleton stood before the hallway mirror, adjusting his posture. He took a deep breath and let his shoulders collapse forward, curving his spine into the shape of a question mark. He practiced the tremor in his right hand, starting with a subtle vibration in the thumb before letting it shudder through his wrist. It had to be convincing. It had to be pathetic. He was about to give the performance of a lifetime, and the audience was waiting in the kitchen with a smile that concealed the syringe. Arthur shuffled down the hallway, dragging his slippers against the hardwood floor to create the sound of a man who could barely lift his feet. He entered the kitchen where the aroma of freshly brewed Colombian coffee masked the stench of betrayal. Eleanor stood by the granite island, radiant in a silk floral robe that Arthur knew cost $800 because he had reviewed the credit card statement 3 months ago. She looked up, her face arranging itself into a mask of exaggerated patience and sweetness. "Good morning, my love," Eleanor cooed, gliding over to guide him to his chair as if he were a toddler learning to walk. "You slept late today. Did you have a rough night?" Arthur blinked slowly, letting his mouth hang open slightly before answering. "I suppose so," he rasped, his voice cracking perfectly. "My head feels heavy, Ellie. Like it is filled with cotton." Eleanor patted his hand, her touch light and cold. "That is just the condition progressing, Arthur. Dr. Thorne said we should expect these foggy mornings. But do not worry. I have your special vitamin ready." She reached for the small ceramic dish on the counter. In the center sat a single blue pill. The same blue pill Arthur had watched her discuss on the monitor less than 12 hours ago. The chemical leash designed to drag him into oblivion. Arthur stared at the pill. His internal calculator whirred. Probability of immediate death, low. Probability of cumulative cognitive decline, 100%. He reached out with a shaking hand, his fingers dancing around the pill before clumsily grasping it. "Thank you, Ellie," he mumbled. "You take such good care of me." He placed the pill on his tongue and reached for the glass of orange juice she offered. As he raised the glass, he deliberately let his hand spasm. The juice sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the table and down the front of his beige cardigan. "Oh, Arthur!" Eleanor exclaimed, though her voice held more annoyance than concern. She turned instantly to the sink to grab a towel. In that split second of distraction, Arthur moved with the speed of a striking cobra. He spat the dry pill into his palm and shoved it deep into the pocket of his cardigan, replacing his hand on the table just as Eleanor whipped back around. By the time she was dabbing at his chest, he was swallowing a mouthful of juice, making a show of gulping it down. "I am sorry," he whimpered, looking down at the stain. "I am so clumsy." "It is okay, sweetheart," Eleanor said, her eyes scanning his face to ensure the pill was gone. She smiled, satisfied. "Just relax. The medicine will kick in soon and you will feel much calmer." Arthur leaned back, closing his eyes as if waiting for the sedation. Inside, his mind was razor-sharp, cataloging every micro-expression on her face. She was not just a liar, she was a bad one. He had just been too blind to see it. The sound of the front door slamming shattered the quiet. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway. Lucas Pendleton burst into the kitchen, his hair disheveled and his designer suit rumpled. He looked like a man who had been running, or perhaps running away. "Mom, Dad, we have a problem," Lucas panted, leaning against the doorframe. Arthur opened his eyes, feigning a slow, confused recognition. "Lucas, is that you, son?" Lucas walked over, pacing nervously around the kitchen island. "It is the startup, Dad. The cloud computing venture. We hit a snag. A massive regulatory hurdle in Singapore. The investors are spooked. They've frozen the bridge capital." Arthur watched his son. He noted the dilated pupils and the slight sheen of sweat on Lucas's upper lip. It was not the look of a businessman facing a regulatory hurdle. It was the look of a gambler who had just lost his shirt. Arthur knew Lucas had not been to Singapore in his life. He also knew the cloud computing venture existed only on a flashy website Arthur had paid a freelancer to investigate weeks ago. "What does that mean?" Eleanor asked, playing her part as the concerned mother, though Arthur noticed she did not seem surprised. "It means I need liquidity," Lucas said, finally looking at Arthur. He dropped to his knees beside Arthur's chair, grabbing the old man's hand. "Dad, I need $50,000. Just for 2 weeks. Once the regulators clear the permit, the funds unlock and I can pay you back double. But if I do not pay the fees by noon, I lose everything. The company, the intellectual property, my reputation. Everything." Arthur looked at the young man kneeling before him. He saw the desperation, yes, but underneath it, he saw the contempt. Lucas thought he was manipulating a senile old fool. He thought this was easy money. 50,000. Arthur repeated, letting his voice tremble with anxiety. "That is a lot of money, Lucas. I do not know if I can." "Dad, please," Lucas squeezed his hand, his grip bordering on painful. "You always said you believed in me. You said I was the future of the Pendleton name. Do not let me fail now. Not when I am so close." Eleanor chimed in, placing a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Arthur, we have the money in the liquid savings. We cannot let our son lose his dream over a paperwork fee. Write him the check. It is just a loan." Arthur looked from his wife to his son. The vultures were circling, pecking at the carcass before it was even dead. He realized this was not just a robbery, it was a test. They wanted to see if the medicine was making him compliant. "Okay," Arthur sighed, a sound of defeat. "Bring me the checkbook." Eleanor produced the checkbook and a pen from the drawer with suspicious speed. She placed them in front of him. Arthur picked up the pen. He hovered the tip over the date line. He let his hands shake violently. The ink bled into the paper, creating a jagged, illegible mess. Lucas watched the pen tip with the intensity of a hawk. Arthur could practically hear the younger man's internal screaming, "Write it, you old bat. Write it, asterisk." Arthur focused. He forced himself to write slowly, painfully. He wrote the date. He wrote the name, Lucas Pendleton. He moved to the amount line. $50,000.00. Each letter was a battle. He stopped halfway through, 1,000, lifting the pen and staring blankly at the wall. "Dad?" Lucas whispered, his voice tight. "What was I writing?" Arthur asked, blinking vacantly. 50,000, Dad. For the business. Ah, yes. The business. Arthur finished the line. Then came the signature. He scrawled a shaky A. Pendleton that looked nothing like the firm, authoritative signature that had once authorized multi-million-dollar mergers. It was the signature of a dying man. He tore the check from the book. The sound was loud in the silent kitchen. He handed it to Lucas. "Make me proud, son," Arthur whispered. Lucas snatched the check, his eyes lighting up with a greed so naked it was almost obscene. "I will, Dad. You won't regret this." Arthur watched Lucas kiss the check before pocketing it. He watched Eleanor smile at Julian's biological son with a pride that sickened him. He knew exactly where that money was going. It was not going to Singapore. It was going to a bookie or a casino, or perhaps to pay off a debt that involved broken kneecaps. Arthur slumped back in his chair, closing his eyes again. "Take the money," he thought. "Take it. It is the last cent you will ever see from me. Consider it the down payment on your prison sentence." "You look exhausted, Arthur," Eleanor said, her voice light with victory. "Why do you not go rest in the den? I will bring you some tea." "I think I will," Arthur said, slowly standing up. His legs felt strong, but he forced them to wobble. He shuffled out of the kitchen, leaning heavily on the doorframe. As he turned the corner, he heard the low murmur of their voices, conspiratorial and excited. He walked toward his study, his hand slipping into his pocket to finger the small blue pill. The check for $50,000 was gone, a small price to pay for the confirmation he had just received. They were not just greedy, they were confident. And their confidence was the only weapon he needed to destroy them. The audit was proceeding exactly as planned. The house fell silent at exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Eleanor had breezed out the front door in a cloud of expensive perfume, cooing about a lymphatic drainage massage at the sanctuary spa that she simply could not miss. Lucas had vanished hours ago, the ink on the $50,000 check likely still wet as he sped toward the nearest casino or high-stakes poker room. Arthur Pendleton waited by the window, watching the tail lights of Eleanor's Mercedes disappear down the winding drive of the Silverleaf estate. As soon as the car was out of sight, the tremors in Arthur's hands ceased instantly. He stood up from his recliner with the agility of a man half his age, shedding the skin of the invalid. He could not risk using the home network. Julian Thorne was arrogant, but he was not stupid, and Arthur suspected the doctor had installed keylogging software on the home desktop under the guise of updating the antivirus. Arthur needed a ghost line. He grabbed a worn canvas tote bag from the back of the coat closet, donned a nondescript fisherman's hat that shadowed his face, and slipped out the side service entrance. He did not take the vintage Ford. The GPS tracker Eleanor insisted on for his safety would alert her the moment the engine turned over. Instead, Arthur walked 2 blocks to the community shuttle stop. To the world, he was just another retiree navigating the slow lane of life. 30 minutes later, Arthur sat in the back corner of the Scottsdale Public Library, nestled between a stack of architectural digests and a row of dusty encyclopedias. The computer terminal hummed with the quiet indifference of public infrastructure. He logged in as a guest, pulled a flash drive from his pocket, and booted a secure, encrypted browser he had coded himself a decade ago. It was time to go to work. Arthur accessed the portal of the private bank that managed the Pendleton Family Trust. He did not use the standard user interface designed for clients. He used a backdoor administrative access key he had retained from his time on the bank's board of directors, a digital skeleton key that allowed him to see the raw data beneath the polished statements. He cracked his knuckles and began the audit. At first glance, the joint accounts looked pristine. The mortgage payments were automated, the utility bills were reasonable, and the credit card payoffs were consistent. But forensic accounting was not about looking at what was there, it was about looking at what was hiding in plain sight. Arthur filtered the transaction history for the last 10 years. He set parameters to flag any recurring withdrawal between $2,000 and $5,000, amounts small enough to avoid federal reporting triggers but large enough to bleed an account dry over time. The screen filled with data. Arthur narrowed his eyes. A pattern emerged, subtle as a heartbeat but undeniable to a man who saw music in numbers. Every Friday, a wire transfer for $3,800 went to an entity listed as Thorne Wellness and Geriatric Consulting. Arthur drilled down into the metadata of the transfers. The memo lines were innocuous: physical therapy retainer, supplement coordination, on-call fee. He opened a new window and accessed the Nevada Secretary of State's business entity search. He typed in the company name. The results loaded in seconds. Thorne Wellness was a limited liability company formed 10 years ago. The registered agent was a generic law firm in Las Vegas, but Arthur dug deeper, pulling the original articles of incorporation. There, buried in the digital paperwork, was the managing member, Julian Thorne. And listed as the treasurer was a shell company called EP Holdings. Arthur traced EP Holdings. The trail led through a maze of 3 different offshore entities before landing squarely on a single beneficiary, Arthur Pendleton. Arthur sat back in the hard library chair, the air conditioning suddenly feeling very cold against his neck. He returned to the bank ledger and highlighted the column of payments to Thorne Wellness. He dragged the cursor down, scrolling through months, then years. The screen blurred with the repetition of the theft. $3,800. $4,200. Sometimes twice a week. Sometimes a lump sum of $9,000 labeled emergency care. He hit the AutoSum function. The figure appeared at the bottom of the spreadsheet in bold black type: $2,480,000. Arthur stared at the number. It was breathless in its audacity. They had not just been waiting for him to die to inherit his wealth, they had been billing him for his own slow murder. For a decade, every time Eleanor had kissed him goodnight, every time Julian had checked his pulse, they had been siphoning his fortune into a nest egg for a future that did not include him. He clicked on another tab, the investment portfolio. He saw the sell orders he supposedly authorized 3 years ago during a bout of pneumonia. Stocks sold at a loss. Bonds liquidated. The proceeds had been transferred to the joint checking account to cover living expenses, or so the ledger claimed. But Arthur traced the flow. The money had entered the checking account and exited 48 hours later into the Thorne Wellness abyss. "They are structuring the deposits," Arthur whispered to the empty library. "They are layering the theft to look like medical necessity." He felt a strange sensation in his chest. It wasn't pain. It was the hollow, echoing thud of the last pillar of his life collapsing. He had built this fortune to protect them. He had worked 80-hour weeks, missed anniversaries, and sacrificed his health to ensure Eleanor would never know a day of want. And she had taken that security and twisted it into a weapon. Arthur plugged in a second flash drive. He began to download everything. Bank statements, canceled checks, the Nevada incorporation documents, the wire transfer receipts. He saved them in triplicate. He created a folder named the Judas Fund. As the progress bar crept toward 100%, Arthur noticed one final transaction pending in the queue. It was dated for today. $50,000. The check he had written to Lucas. It had been deposited not into a business account for a Singapore startup, but directly into a personal account at a credit union. Arthur queried the credit union account. It was overdrawn by $49,000. Lucas wasn't investing, he was paying off a shark. Arthur ejected the drives and slipped them into his pocket next to the blue pill. He checked his watch. Eleanor would be finishing her massage soon. She would expect him to be waking up from his nap, groggy and confused. He stood up and cleared the browser history, wiping his digital footprints. He walked out of the library and into the blinding Arizona sun. He felt lighter. The confusion was gone. The heartbreak was neatly filed away in a box marked irrelevant. He had the numbers now. And in Arthur Pendleton's world, numbers were the only things that never lied. He boarded the bus back to Silverleaf, not as a victim returning to the scene of the crime, but as the auditor coming to close the books. 3 days after confirming the financial hemorrhage in the library, Arthur Pendleton orchestrated his next move with the precision of a black ops mission. He told Eleanor he was visiting the grave of his first wife, a somber ritual he performed annually that Eleanor respected only because it kept him out of the house for the entire afternoon. She had even packed him a thermos of tea, her face the picture of sympathetic grief as she handed it to him. Arthur had poured the tea into a storm drain 3 blocks away before hailing a ride-share service using a burner phone he had purchased with cash. The destination was not a cemetery but the dusty outskirts of Phoenix, miles away from the manicured lawns of Silverleaf. The building was a nondescript beige cube with a sign that read Southwestern Toxicology and Pathology. It was a place for autopsies and industrial accident investigations, not for wealthy retirees, which made it perfect. Arthur sat on the crinkling paper of the exam table, his shirt unbuttoned, the air conditioning humming a monotonous tune. He had shed the tremulous act the moment he walked through the heavy security doors. Dr. Silas Vance, a man with skin the color of mahogany and eyes that had seen too many suspicious deaths, entered the room holding a clipboard. He did not smile. Toxicologists rarely did. Arthur watched Vance flip through the pages of the report. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Arthur had provided blood samples, urine samples, and hair follicles 2 days prior under a pseudonym, but today he had come to claim the results under his true name. He had also handed over the blue pill and the residue from the thermos he had saved earlier in the week. "Mr. Pendleton," Vance began, his voice gravelly. "I need to ask you a very serious question before we proceed. Are you currently under the care of a physician for severe psychosis or terminal palliative care?" "No," Arthur replied, his voice steady. "I am being treated for early-onset Parkinson's and age-related cognitive decline." Vance closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Then your doctor is either the most incompetent practitioner in Arizona, or he is trying to kill you." Arthur did not flinch. He had suspected it, but hearing it spoken aloud by a stranger gave the horror of physical weight. "Please, give me the specifics. I need the data." Vance pulled up a chair and sat facing Arthur. "Let us start with the blue pill. It is not a standard pharmaceutical. It is a compounded mixture. Primarily, it contains a high dose of midazolam, a powerful sedative used for anesthesia. But it is cut with haloperidol, an antipsychotic. The combination would explain your lethargy, the tremors, the memory fog. It is a chemical lobotomy, Mr. Pendleton. It is designed to turn you into a vegetable." Arthur nodded slowly. He felt a cold detachment, as if they were discussing the structural integrity of a failing bridge rather than his own brain. "And the blood work?" Vance leaned forward, his expression darkening. That is where it gets criminal. Your hair analysis shows chronic exposure to arsenic. It is low dose, cumulative. You have been ingesting it for at least 18 months. It is likely being introduced in liquids. Tea, coffee, soup. It is tasteless, odorless. Arsenic, Arthur repeated. The classic weapon of the Black Widow. It is effective, Vance said grimly. It mimics natural deterioration. Heart arrhythmia, nerve damage, skin lesions. If an old man dies of heart failure, no one questions it. They just bury him. How long? Arthur asked. The question was not born of fear, but of scheduling. Vance looked at the chart again. Your heart shows signs of significant stress. The toxicity is straining your mitral valve. If you continue to ingest this cocktail daily, your heart will stop. I would estimate you have less than 6 months. Maximum. 6 months. Arthur did the mental calculation instantly. Today was April. 6 months would be October. Specifically, October 12th. My 75th birthday, Arthur whispered. Vance paused, realizing the implication. Is there a significance to that date? Arthur looked at the doctor, his eyes hard as flint. On my 75th birthday, the terms of my family trust reset. If I am alive and competent, I retain control. If I am deceased or declared mentally incapacitated, the principal vests immediately to my spouse and child. They are not just killing me, doctor. They are working on a deadline. Vance stood up and walked to the counter. I am legally obligated to report this to the police. This is attempted murder. No, Arthur commanded. The authority in his voice stopped the doctor mid-stride. Not yet. Mr. Pendleton, you are in immediate danger. I am in a negotiation, Arthur corrected him, buttoning his shirt. If you go to the police now, they will claim it was an accident. They will blame a pharmacy error. They will claim I was confused and took the wrong dosage. They have spent 2 years building a narrative of my senility. I need indisputable proof. I need to catch them holding the smoking gun. Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. He wrote a check for $5,000. This is for your discretion and for a rush on the official toxicology report. I want it notarized. I want it watertight. Can you do that? Vance looked at the check, then at the old man who suddenly seemed made of steel. He nodded slowly. I can prepare the forensic report. But you cannot go back to that house. You cannot eat their food. I will manage the intake, Arthur said. I have been discarding the pills for a week. I will handle the food. He stood up, adjusting his hat. The grief he had felt watching the video, the heartbreak of seeing Lucas betray him, it was all gone. Burned away by the acid of the truth. Eleanor and Julian had put a calendar on his life. They had marked his expiration date like a carton of milk. They saw him as a liability to be liquidated on a schedule. But Arthur Pendleton was not a liability. He was the auditor. And he had just found a discrepancy that would cost them their freedom. Thank you, Doctor, Arthur said. You have saved my life. Now, I have to go end theirs. He walked out of the clinic into the blinding white heat of the afternoon. He checked his watch. He had 2 hours before he had to return to Silverleaf and play the role of the stumbling, dying husband. He would go home. He would kiss Eleanor on the cheek. He would thank her for the tea. And he would watch them with the patience of a spider sitting in the center of a web, waiting for the fly to make one final, fatal mistake. The medical verdict was in. The cause of death would not be heart failure. It would be justice. The toxicology report burned a hole in the inside pocket of Arthur Pendleton's tweed jacket as he sat at the head of his dining table that evening. The silence in the room was punctuated only by the scrape of silverware against china. Eleanor sat to his right, picking at a salad with the delicate precision of a bird of prey. Lucas sat to his left, devouring a medium-rare steak with a ferocity that made Arthur look away. Arthur watched his son. He really watched him. For 30 years, he had seen Lucas through the soft focus lens of paternal love. He had seen a boy who struggled with math but loved fast cars. He had seen a young man who failed at business but possessed a certain roguish charm. Arthur had always attributed Lucas's lack of aptitude for numbers to Eleanor's side of the family. He had blamed the boy's weak chin on a recessive gene from his own great-grandfather. But tonight, the lens was gone. In its place was the cold, hard magnification of the auditor. Arthur studied the way Lucas held his fork. He gripped it like a shovel, his thumb pressing hard against the handle. It was an idiosyncratic grip. Arthur glanced at the empty chair where Julian Thorne usually sat during their Friday night bridge games. Julian held his pen the exact same way. Then there was the nose. Arthur had always told himself Lucas had grown into his features, but looking at the bridge of his nose now, the slight hook that cast a shadow over his lips, Arthur felt the wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the arsenic in his system. It was Julian's nose. It was Julian's hairline. It was Julian's arrogance sitting at his table, wearing his name like a stolen coat. The realization did not break his heart, it calcified it. If the poisoning was the theft of his future, this was the theft of his past. He had spent millions on private schools, tutors, cars, and bail money for a stranger. "Dad, are you okay?" "You are staring," Lucas said, wiping grease from his mouth with a linen napkin. Arthur blinked, letting his mouth slacken into the familiar mask of confusion. "I am sorry, Lucas. I thought I saw a fly. My eyes are playing tricks on me again." Eleanor sighed, a sound of practiced martyrdom. "Eat your peas, Arthur. You need your strength." Arthur managed a weak smile and pushed a pea around his plate. He needed samples. If he was going to dismantle their lives, he needed the biological receipt. Later that night, the house settled into a heavy quiet. Arthur waited until the grandfather clock in the hall chimed 2 in the morning. He slipped out of bed, leaving Eleanor breathing deeply beside him. He crept down the hall to the guest suite where Lucas was staying while he sorted out his housing situation, which Arthur knew meant hiding from loan sharks. The door was ajar. Arthur moved like a ghost. He entered the ensuite bathroom. The moonlight filtered through the skylight, illuminating the marble countertop. There, in a crystal tumbler, sat Lucas's toothbrush. Arthur pulled a pair of latex gloves from his robe pocket, gloves he had pilfered from the clinic earlier that day. He took a sterile evidence bag, labeled Subject A, and carefully lifted the toothbrush. He sealed the bag with a soft zip. One down. He returned to the master bedroom. Eleanor was still asleep, one arm thrown over her head. Arthur moved to her vanity. Her silver hairbrush lay amidst a clutter of perfumes and creams. It was almost too easy. He plucked 3 long, silver strands from the bristles, ensuring the follicles were attached. He placed them in the bag labeled Subject B. The final piece of the puzzle was the most dangerous. He needed Julian. Fate, or perhaps the devil, intervened the next afternoon. Arthur was sitting in the sunroom, pretending to do a crossword puzzle but actually filling in random letters, when the doorbell rang. It was Julian, carrying a medical bag and wearing a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I was just in the neighborhood," Julian announced, walking into the sunroom as Eleanor trailed behind him, beaming. "Thought I would check on my favorite patient." Arthur forced his hands to tremble as he set down the puzzle. "Julian. How kind." Julian sat opposite him, checking his pulse, shining a light in his eyes. Arthur endured the touch of the man who was poisoning him, the man who had slept with his wife, the man who had sired the son Arthur raised. It took every ounce of his will not to snap the doctor's finger. "You seem a bit dehydrated, Arthur," Julian said, sitting back. "Eleanor, perhaps a glass of water? Or better yet, I brought a bottle of that Pinot Noir Arthur likes. Maybe a small glass would help him relax. It is good for the heart, in moderation." Eleanor clapped her hands. "What a wonderful idea." She brought 3 glasses. Julian poured. He took a sip, swirling the red liquid in his mouth before swallowing. "Excellent vintage." Arthur took his glass. He brought it to his lips but did not drink. He pretended to sip, letting the liquid touch his lips before lowering it. They chatted for 20 minutes about golf and the weather. Arthur played the fool, nodding at the wrong times, asking Julian the same question twice. Julian and Eleanor exchanged amused glances. When Julian finished his wine, he set the glass on the low coffee table. "I must run," he said, standing up. "Hospital rounds." Arthur watched the glass. A single drop of red wine stained the rim where Julian's lips had been. A perfect DNA sample. "I will walk you out," Eleanor said, linking her arm with Julian's. As soon as they turned the corner, Arthur lunged. He grabbed the glass by the stem, careful not to smudge the rim. He poured the remaining wine into a potted fern and slipped the glass into a large Ziploc bag he had taped to the underside of the table earlier that morning. He hid the bag in the deep pocket of his cardigan just as Eleanor returned. "Where is Julian's glass?" she asked, frowning at the empty table. Arthur looked up, innocent and vacant. I took it to the kitchen, Ellie. I wanted to help." Eleanor rolled her eyes. "You probably put it in the trash compactor again. Honestly, Arthur, you are becoming impossible." She marched to the kitchen to scold the maids. Arthur smiled. An hour later, Arthur walked to the mailbox at the end of the drive. He carried a padded envelope addressed to Genity Corp Solutions in San Francisco, a lab that specialized in high-speed, discrete paternity testing for the ultra-wealthy. Inside were 3 bags, the toothbrush, the hair, and a cotton swab he had rubbed along the rim of the wine glass before shattering it in the trash to cover his tracks. He raised the red flag on the mailbox. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and blood orange. Arthur felt a grim satisfaction. He had the financial records. He had the toxicology report. And soon, he would have the biological proof that his entire family was a fiction. He turned back toward the house, his shadow stretching long and thin across the gravel. He was building a case that would put them behind bars for the rest of their natural lives. But first, he had to survive dinner. The audit was nearing its conclusion, and the final numbers were about to be tallied. The heavy oak door of the law firm Sterling and Associates closed with a reassuring thud, shutting out the noise of downtown Phoenix. Arthur Pendleton stood in the center of the office, breathing in the scent of old paper and lemon polish. It was a smell from a different era, a time before digital clouds and high-speed trading, a time when a handshake meant something and a betrayal was met with a duel, not a lawsuit. Benjamin Sterling, 80 years old and sharp as a tack, sat behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from the hull of a galleon. He stared at Arthur over the rim of his spectacles. For a moment, neither man spoke. They had not seen each other in 3 years, ever since Eleanor had subtly cut Arthur off from his old circle, claiming the excitement was bad for his heart. "You look like hell, Arthur," Benjamin grunted, not rising from his chair. "I am dying, Ben," Arthur replied, his voice devoid of the tremor he used at home. "Literally. They are poisoning me with arsenic." Benjamin's face went slack. He gestured to the leather chair opposite him. "Sit down. Tell me everything. And do not leave out a single decimal point." Arthur sat. Beside him sat a younger man, a private investigator named Marcus Cole, whom Benjamin had summoned at Arthur's request. Cole was a former federal agent with eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for discretion that cost $500 an hour. Arthur opened his briefcase. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he laid out the evidence like a royal flush. First came the toxicology report from Dr. Vance, notarized and damning. Next came the printouts of the wire transfers to Thorne Wellness, totaling millions. Finally, he placed the USB drive containing the video footage of Eleanor and Julian in the living room. "They are killing me by inches," Arthur said, his voice cold and steady. "And they plan to finish the job before my 75th birthday in October." Benjamin read the toxicology report. His hands, usually steady as stone, shook slightly as he turned the page. "Attempted murder," he whispered. "Conspiracy. Fraud. Grand larceny." "Arthur, we need to go to the district attorney. We need to have them arrested today." "No," Arthur said. The refusal was sharp, commanding. "Why?" Cole asked, leaning forward. "You have enough here to put them away for 20 years. "Because prison is too good for them," Arthur said, looking at the investigator. "If we arrest them now, they will hire expensive defense attorneys. They will claim I am senile, that I consented to the transfers, that the arsenic was an accidental environmental exposure. They will drag this out in court for a decade while spending my money to defend themselves. I do not want them just in prison. I want them destitute. I want them destroyed." Arthur turned to Benjamin. "I want to initiate Protocol Omega." Benjamin's eyes widened. "Omega?" "Arthur, that is the nuclear auction. It is irreversible." "Do it," Arthur said. Protocol Omega was a contingency plan Arthur and Benjamin had devised 30 years ago, back when Arthur was first building his empire. It was a scorched earth financial strategy designed to protect the Pendleton assets from the hostile corporate takeover or a catastrophic market collapse. It involved the immediate liquidation of domestic liquid assets and their transfer into a labyrinth of irrevocable blind trusts domiciled in the Cook Islands and Nevis, jurisdictions that did not recognize U.S. court judgments. Arthur pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Here is the authorization. I am liquidating the investment portfolio. $80 million. I am draining the joint savings. I am selling the bond maturity contracts. Every cent that Eleanor and Lucas think is sitting in the First National Bank of Arizona will be gone by Monday morning." "But the house?" Benjamin asked. "You cannot move real estate offshore." "I sold it yesterday," Arthur said with a grim smile. "To a shell company controlled by the Blind Trust. They are living in a property they do not own, sleeping in beds that belong to a ghost corporation. When the time comes, I will evict them with the clothes on their backs." Cole whistled low. Remind me never to cross you, Mr. Pendleton. Arthur turned to the investigator. Your job is the final nail, Mr. Cole. I need you to build the criminal case. I want surveillance on Julian Thorne's medical practice. Find other patients who died suddenly. Find the pattern. I want to know where Lucas buys his drugs and who holds his gambling debts. I want to know every sin they have committed since the day they met me. I will get it, Cole promised. If they jaywalked in 1995, you will know about it. Arthur stood up and walked to the window. He looked down at the city he had helped build. He felt a strange vibration in his chest, not the flutter of a failing heart, but the hum of a machine running at peak efficiency. For years, he had been the provider, the protector, the benevolent patriarch. He had softened. He had allowed love to dull his edges. But the arsenic had burned away the softness. Benjamin stood up and walked over to his old friend. He placed a hand on Arthur's shoulder. We will draft the new will immediately. Lucas is out. Lucas was never in, Arthur said quietly. He is not my son, Ben. The DNA test confirmed it. Benjamin sucked in a breath. Good God, Arthur. He is Julian's, Arthur said, staring at his own reflection in the glass. I raised another man's son. I paid for his schools. I bought his first car. I taught him how to shave. And now he wants to kill me for $50,000. He turned back to the room, his eyes dry and hard. Leave them nothing, Ben. Not a single copper penny. I want the trust rewritten so that the entire estate goes to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, effective immediately upon my death. But I plan on living a very long time. He checked his watch. He had been gone for 2 hours. Eleanor thought he was at the bank signing the preliminary paperwork to grant her power of attorney. She would be waiting for him, eager to hear that the keys to the kingdom were almost in her grasp. I have to go back, Arthur said, buttoning his tweed jacket. The performance must continue. Be careful, Arthur, Benjamin warned. You are sleeping in a nest of vipers. I am not worried, Arthur said, opening the door. Vipers only strike when they feel threatened. Right now, they think I am a toothless old mouse. They have no idea they are locked in a cage with a mongoose. He shook hands with his allies, the shadow alliance formed in the dim light of the law office. As he stepped into the elevator, Arthur adjusted his hat and let his shoulders slump. He practiced the tremor in his hand. He was going back to Silverleaf, back to the poison tea and the fake smiles. He would play the fool for a few more days. He would let them gloat. He would let them plan his funeral. And all the while, he would be watching the digital readout of his bank accounts, waiting for the balance to hit zero. The liquidation had begun. The envelope from Genedy Corp Solutions arrived 2 days later, nestled between a Pottery Barn catalog and a utility bill. Arthur Pendleton retrieved it from the mailbox with a hand that did not shake. He walked into his study, closed the door, and sat down at his desk. The room was silent save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. He did not open the envelope immediately. He stared at his name printed on the front, the crisp white paper a stark contrast to the dark mahogany of his desk. Inside that envelope lay the scientific confirmation of a betrayal so profound it threatened to rewrite his entire history. He had suspected it. He had known it in his gut since the night he saw Julian and Eleanor together. But knowing and seeing were two different things. A suspicion was a shadow, the DNA report was a spotlight. He used a silver letter opener to slit the seal. He pulled out the single sheet of paper. Arthur's eyes scanned the document. He skipped the technical jargon, the loci markers, the statistical probabilities. He went straight to the conclusion at the bottom of the page. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. Alleged father, Arthur Pendleton. Child, Lucas Pendleton. Conclusion, excluded. Arthur let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. It was a long, shuddering exhale that seemed to deflate his entire body. He leaned back in his chair, the paper fluttering from his fingers to the desk. 0%. Not a trace. Not a single strand of his DNA existed in the man he had called son for 30 years. He closed his eyes. Memories flooded his mind, unbidden and painful. He saw himself teaching a 5-year-old Lucas to ride a bike without training wheels, running alongside him, cheering when the boy finally balanced. He saw himself sitting in the stands at a Little League game, beaming with pride when Lucas hit a home run. He saw himself teaching a teenager how to tie a tie for prom, adjusting the knot with clumsy affection. Every smile, every hug, every "I love you, Dad" had been a lie. A performance. A long con played out over 3 decades. Arthur opened his eyes. The grief was there, sharp and stinging, but it was different now. It was cold. It was the grief of a man mourning a stranger. The boy he loved had never existed. Lucas was not his son. He was a biological weapon deployed by Eleanor and Julian to infiltrate his heart and wallet. He picked up the second report in the envelope. The one he had requested for Julian Thorne. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Alleged father, Julian Thorne. Child, Lucas Pendleton. Asterisk conclusion. Inclusion, asterisk. Arthur laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that echoed in the empty room. Of course. The nose. The hairline. The way they both held a pen. It was genetics screaming the truth he had been too blind to see. Eleanor had been sleeping with Julian since before she met Arthur. She had likely been pregnant with Julian's child when she targeted the wealthy, lonely widower. She had needed a provider, a sucker to foot the bill for another man's progeny. And Arthur had played the role perfectly. The fool. The mark. The ATM. He stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the Arizona sun beat down on the manicured lawn of Silverleaf. He saw Lucas's car pull into the driveway. The young man got out, talking animatedly on his phone, laughing. He looked carefree, entitled, the prince of a kingdom he believed was his birthright. Arthur watched him with a detachment that frightened him. He felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just a clinical observation of a parasite. He turned back to his desk. He opened his laptop and logged into the secure portal of the offshore trust. He initiated the final transfer. The last of the liquid assets, the college fund he had set up for Lucas's future children, vanished into the ether of the Cook Islands. "Goodbye, Lucas," Arthur whispered to the empty room. "I hope your real father has deep pockets." He picked up the phone and dialed Benjamin Sterling's private number. "It is done," Arthur said when the lawyer answered. "The DNA is conclusive. Lucas is Julian's." There was a pause on the other end. "I am so sorry, Arthur." "Do not be," Arthur said, his voice hard. "It simplifies things. There is no moral ambiguity now. No hesitation. They are all conspirators." "What is the next step?" Benjamin asked. Arthur looked at the calendar on his desk. The date of his 75th birthday was circled in red ink. October 12th. The day they planned to declare him incompetent. The day they planned to celebrate their victory. "We moved the timeline up," Arthur said. "I am not waiting until October. My birthday party is next week. I am throwing a surprise celebration. And the guest of honor will be the truth." He hung up the phone. He looked at the family photo on his desk one last time. Eleanor, Lucas, and him. A perfect family. A perfect lie. He picked up the frame and dropped it into the trash can. The glass shattered with a satisfying crunch. Arthur walked out of the study. He found Eleanor in the kitchen, arranging flowers. She looked up and smiled, that same sweet, venomous smile he had once adored. "Did you have a good nap, darling?" she asked. Arthur shuffled over to her, letting his shoulders slump. He kissed her on the cheek. "I had a dream, Ellie. A strange dream. I dreamt I was lost in a maze, and I couldn't find my way out." Eleanor patted his hand. "It was just a dream, Arthur. You are safe here. With me." Arthur nodded, his eyes vacant. "Yes. Safe." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "Oh, Ellie. I was thinking. Since I have been feeling so confused lately, maybe we should have a small gathering next week. For my birthday. A little early. Just family and close friends. I want to make sure I see everyone while I still remember them." Eleanor's eyes lit up. "A party? That sounds wonderful, Arthur. We can invite Julian, of course. And Lucas. It will be good for you." Arthur smiled. "Yes. Good for me." He walked away, leaving her to plan the event that would be her undoing. He felt a surge of energy. The grief was gone. The confusion was an act. The only thing real was the plan. And the plan was perfect. The descent into madness began at breakfast the following morning. Arthur sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a plate of scrambled eggs. Eleanor busied herself at the counter, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like a funeral dirge. Arthur waited until she turned around with the coffee pot. "Margaret," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and affection. "Margaret, darling, did you remember to iron my gray suit? I have the board meeting at 9. Eleanor froze. The coffee pot hovered in mid-air. She turned slowly, her eyes wide. Margaret was Arthur's first wife, a woman who had been dead for 32 years. Eleanor had spent 3 decades trying to erase her memory from this house, replacing her portraits with abstract art and her antique furniture with modern Italian leather. "Arthur?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Who are you talking to?" "Why, to you, Margaret," Arthur said, offering a lopsided smile. "You look lovely today. Is that a new dress?" Eleanor set the pot down with a clatter. "I am Eleanor, Arthur. Your wife. Margaret is dead. She has been dead since 1994. Arthur blinked rapidly, feigning a sudden, terrifying realization. "Eleanor. But, no, that cannot be right. We were just..." He let his voice trail off, burying his face in his hands. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. Everything is fuzzy." Eleanor walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. It was meant to be comforting, but Arthur felt the tension in her grip. "It is okay, Arthur. It is just the condition. You are tired." She turned her head away from him, and Arthur, peering through the gap in his fingers, saw the smile she could not suppress. It was a predator's smile, sharp and triumphant. She pulled out her phone and typed a quick message, likely to Julian. He is slipping fast. Later that afternoon, Arthur escalated the performance. He shuffled down the hallway, muttering to himself, and stopped in front of the linen closet. He opened the door and began to unbuckle his belt. "Arthur!" Eleanor shrieked, coming up the stairs. "What on earth are you doing?" Arthur looked at her with wide, innocent eyes. "I need to use the restroom, Ellie." "That is the closet." Eleanor grabbed his arm, steering him away with a roughness she usually concealed. "The bathroom is 3 doors down." "My God, Arthur, you are losing your mind." I got lost," Arthur whimpered, allowing himself to be led like a naughty child. By evening, Julian Thorne had arrived. He did not even pretend to bring a medical bag this time. He walked in with the swagger of a man who had already won the lottery. He and Eleanor sat in the living room, sipping Arthur's wine, while Arthur stood in front of the large oil painting in his study that concealed the wall safe. He stood there for 20 minutes, spinning the dial back and forth, muttering numbers that were incorrect. He knew the combination perfectly, 3, 18, 72. But he dialed 4, 20, 60. Over and over again. Finally, he shuffled into the living room, tears of frustration in his eyes. "Ellie," he said, interrupting their hushed conversation. "The safe. It is broken. I cannot get my papers." Eleanor exchanged a look with Julian. A look that said jackpot. "It is not broken, Arthur," she said, standing up. "You have forgotten the combination again, I haven not." Arthur insisted, stamping his foot weakly. It is. He trailed off, looking helpless. Julian stood up and walked over, placing a patronizing hand on Arthur's back. "Why do you not let Eleanor help you, Arthur? You should not be worrying about safe combinations in your state. In fact, it might be safer if Eleanor held on to the contents for you. Just until you are feeling better." Arthur looked from Julian to Eleanor. He let his shoulders slump in defeat. "Perhaps you are right, Julian. My mind, it is like a sieve." He led them to the study. He watched as Eleanor pushed the painting aside and deftly entered the combination he had forgotten. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside lay stacks of documents, deeds, and stock certificates. Or at least, copies of them. Arthur had moved the originals to a safety deposit box in the Cayman Islands 3 days ago. "Thank you, Ellie," Arthur whispered. I am so tired. Why do you not go up to bed?" Eleanor suggested, her eyes already scanning the papers in the safe. "We will sort this out." Arthur nodded and shuffled out of the room. He climbed the stairs, his footsteps heavy and slow. But he did not go to the bedroom. He went to the guest room directly above the study, where he had hidden a baby monitor under the bed. He lay on the floor, pressing the receiver to his ear. Downstairs, the vultures were feasting. "Did you hear him call me Margaret?" Eleanor's voice came through the speaker, distorted but clear. "He is completely gone, Julian. The arsenic is working faster than we thought." "It is the combination with the sedatives," Julian replied. "His neurological pathways are degrading. At this rate, he will be a drooling vegetable by the weekend. We might not even need to wait for the birthday. We can file for emergency guardianship on Monday." Arthur listened, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against the floorboards. "Look at this," Eleanor said, likely holding up a stock certificate. "Microsoft. Apple. Berkshire Hathaway. There must be $10 million in this safe alone. And he just handed it to me. He trusts you, Julian laughed. The poor old fool thinks you are his caretaker. He has no idea you are his executioner. I almost feel bad for him, Eleanor said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Almost. But then I remember 30 years of listening to his boring stories about tax law and bridge tournaments. I earned this, Julian. I earned every penny. You certainly did, my love, Julian said. And soon, we will be spending it on a beach in St. Tropez. Just you, me, and Lucas. No more sneaking around. No more pretending to care about his blood pressure. Arthur pressed the record button on the device connected to the monitor. He captured every word. He captured the clinking of glasses. He captured the sound of them celebrating his imminent death. They thought he was upstairs, lost in a fog of dementia. They thought the game was over. They did not know that the old man on the floor was not losing his mind. He was sharpening it. He was letting them get comfortable. He was letting them get arrogant. Because arrogance, Arthur knew from 40 years of forensic accounting, was the one variable that always ruined the perfect crime. He saved the recording. He checked the battery level on the hidden cameras downstairs. Everything was green. He stood up and walked to the window. The moon hung low over Silverleaf, casting long shadows across the lawn. Monday, they said. They wanted to file for guardianship on Monday. Arthur smiled a cold, thin smile. I am afraid, he whispered to the night, that you will be otherwise engaged on Monday. He went to his bedroom, climbed into bed, and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a man who knew exactly how the story would end. The dementia gambit had been played to perfection. Now, it was time for the endgame. Arthur Pendleton sat in the sunroom, a blanket draped over his knees despite the warmth of the Arizona afternoon. He stared vacantly at the manicured lawn, his hands resting still in his lap. Eleanor was in the kitchen, humming as she prepared lunch, her mood buoyed by the belief that her husband's mind had finally snapped. Lucas sat opposite him, scrolling through his phone, ignoring the old man entirely. Arthur waited for the right moment. He let his gaze drift to Lucas, his eyes clouding over with feigned confusion. Lucas? He asked, his voice thin and reedy. Is that you? Lucas sighed, not looking up. Yes, Arthur. It is me. Arthur leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I have been thinking, son. About that investment you mentioned. The one with the cloud computing. Lucas's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed, then widened with sudden interest. He put the phone down. The Singapore project? Yes, Arthur nodded slowly. I have been looking at the numbers. In my head, of course. My eyes are not what they used to be. But I remember you said it was a sure thing. Lucas leaned in, his voice taking on a predatory smoothness. It is, Arthur. It is going to be huge. We just need that initial capital to unlock the permits. Arthur sighed, looking troubled. I have been worried about my portfolio. The market is so volatile. And my memory, it is fading. I want to make sure you are taken care of, Lucas. Before I forget how to sign my name. Lucas's eyes gleamed. He smelled blood in the water. What are you saying? I want to liquidate the blue chip stocks, Arthur said, his voice trembling. All of them. $5 million worth. I want to put it all into your venture. It seems safer than leaving it in the market where I might forget about it. Lucas nearly choked on his own saliva. 5 million. Are you serious? I want to do it right, Arthur said, looking earnest. I want to give you power of attorney over the transaction, so you can manage it for me. I trust you, son. You are the only one I trust. Lucas glanced toward the kitchen, ensuring Eleanor was out of earshot. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. We can do that, Arthur. I can have the papers drawn up today. We can sign them right now. No, Arthur said, shaking his head. Not now. I want to do it properly. I want to sign them at my party next week. In front of everyone. I want to make a speech. I want everyone to know how proud I am of you. Lucas hesitated. Next week. That is a long time, Arthur. The market could shift. It is only a few days, Arthur said, his voice taking on a stubborn edge. I want to celebrate. It is my 75th birthday, after all. It is a milestone. Lucas looked at the old man, weighing the risk. He saw a senile fool handing him the keys to the kingdom. He saw a way to bypass Eleanor and Julian and take the lion's share for himself. He smiled, a greasy, satisfied smile. Okay, Arthur, he said, patting the old man's knee. We will do it your way. At the party. But let me handle the paperwork. I will have everything ready. Arthur smiled back, a weak, grateful smile. Thank you, Lucas. You are a good boy. As Lucas hurried away to call his lawyer, Arthur watched him go. He felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. The greed trap had sprung. Lucas was so blinded by the promise of $5 million that he didn't stop to question why a man he considered senile was suddenly making such a lucid financial decision. He didn't wonder why Arthur insisted on a public signing. Arthur knew exactly why. A power of attorney signed under duress or by an incompetent person was contestable. But a power of attorney signed in front of witnesses, after a lucid speech, was ironclad evidence of intent. Or rather, evidence of attempted fraud when the signatory revealed he was perfectly sane and had been setting a trap all along. Later that afternoon, Arthur went to his study. He pulled a fresh legal pad from his drawer. He began to draft a speech. Not the rambling, confused speech Lucas expected. This would be a masterpiece of forensic rhetoric. He outlined the points he would hit, the history of the trust, the medical betrayals, the financial theft. He would weave the narrative so tightly that by the time he signed the power of attorney, it would be a confession, not a transfer. He paused, looking at the date on the calendar. 5 days. 5 days until the party. 5 days to play the fool. He heard Eleanor's footsteps in the hall. He quickly hid the legal pad and slumped in his chair, letting his mouth hang open. Arthur. Eleanor called, poking her head in. Are you in here? I think so, Arthur mumbled, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Where is my mother? Eleanor sighed, shaking her head. Your mother died 40 years ago, Arthur. Come on. Let us get you cleaned up for dinner. Arthur allowed her to lead him out, his mind already calculating the next move. The pieces were all in place. The trap was set. Now, he just had to wait for the prey to walk in. The preparations for the 75th birthday celebration of Arthur Pendleton took on the atmosphere of a coronation. Eleanor moved through the house with the energy of a woman who had already won the war, barking orders at the caterers and florists with the imperious snap of her fingers. She believed she was organizing the final social event of her husband's life, a public display of his decline that would seamlessly transition into her regency. To Arthur, however, she was merely dressing the set for her own execution. Arthur sat in the library, a tartan blanket draped over his legs to maintain the illusion of frailty. He held the guest list in his trembling hands, a pen hovering over the paper. Eleanor stood over him, her perfume cloying in the stagnant air of the room. "We must invite everyone, Ellie," Arthur said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I want to see all the old faces. Before the fog gets too thick." "Of course, darling," Eleanor said, patting his shoulder with a condescending smile. "Who did you have in mind?" Arthur looked up, his eyes wide and watery. "Jim Miller. Sheriff Miller. We played poker together every Thursday for 20 years. I miss him, Ellie." Eleanor stiffened. The sheriff of Maricopa County was not someone she wanted poking around, even if he was retired from active patrol and mostly pushed papers now. But Arthur looked so pathetic, so harmless. "He is such a bore, Arthur," she sighed. "And he always smells of cheap tobacco." "Please, Ellie," Arthur wheezed, clutching her hand. "For old time's sake. He is the only one who remembers the way things used to be." Eleanor rolled her eyes, calculating the risk. Miller was 70 years old and likely as senile as Arthur. Besides, having law enforcement present when Arthur signed the power of attorney over to Lucas would only add a layer of legitimacy to the theft. It would look like a sanctioned transfer. "Fine," she said. "We will invite the sheriff." "Anyone else?" "Sarah," Arthur said softly. "Sarah Thorne." Eleanor froze. Sarah Thorne was Julian's wife, a quiet, long-suffering woman who spent her days volunteering at the animal shelter and oblivious to the fact that her husband spent his nights in Arthur's bed. "Why on earth would we invite Sarah?" Eleanor asked sharply. "Julian is coming. That is enough." Arthur let a tear slip down his cheek. "Julian has been so good to me, Ellie. He has saved my life. I want to honor him. I want his wife to see how much we appreciate him. It would be rude not to include her in the family celebration." He emphasized the word family with a subtle inflection that Eleanor missed entirely. She was too busy reveling in the cruelty of the idea. To have Julian's wife there, watching her husband fawn over Eleanor, unaware that she was the other woman, appealed to Eleanor's twisted sense of superiority. It was a power play she could not resist. "You are so thoughtful, Arthur," she purred. "You are right. Sarah should be there to see Julian's success. I will add her to the list." Arthur nodded, looking down at his lap to hide the cold gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. He had placed the rook and the bishop on the board. "Now for the knights. I want the partners from the firm," Arthur continued. "Henderson, Blackwell, and Stein. All of them." "They are busy men, Arthur," Eleanor dismissed. "They do not have time for birthday parties." Tell them I am making an announcement," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Tell them I am stepping down as chairman emeritus. Tell them I am handing the reins to Lucas. They will come for that." Eleanor's eyes lit up. The partners. The witnesses. If the titans of Arizona industry saw Arthur voluntarily hand power to Lucas, no court in the land could overturn it later. It was perfect. "I will call them myself," she promised. Once the list was finalized, Arthur shuffled off to his afternoon nap. But he did not sleep. He lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, constructing the timeline in his head. The party was set for Saturday evening. At 7 o'clock, cocktails. At 8 o'clock, dinner. At 9 o'clock, the speeches. He reached under his mattress and pulled out the burner phone. He sent a single text message to Marcus Cole, the private investigator, *, the stage is set. Saturday, 9 p.m. Bring the projector. Protocol Omega is active, *. He then texted Benjamin Sterling. *, bring the paperwork. The final draft. I will sign it in the study at 6:45 p.m. before the guests arrive, *. The final draft of his will was a document of terrifying simplicity. Arthur had spent 40 years writing complex trust instruments, but this one was blunt force trauma. It revoked all previous wills and codicils. It explicitly disinherited Eleanor Pendleton and Lucas Pendleton, citing conduct unbecoming and proven biological estrangement. It left the entirety of his estate, including the house they were standing in, the cars they drove, and the liquid assets he had already moved offshore, to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. There was a specific clause Arthur had added just yesterday, a clause that gave him a grim sense of pleasure. To my wife, Eleanor, I leave my collection of medical records and surveillance footage, so that she may remember the husband she thought she could fool. To Lucas, I leave the sum of $1, which is exactly $1 more than his biological father ever contributed to his upbringing, *. Arthur hid the phone again. He could hear Lucas in the hallway, boasting on the phone to a bookie, likely promising payment by Monday morning. The boy was spending money he did not have, banking on an inheritance that had already evaporated. Arthur closed his eyes and visualized the party. He saw the crystal glasses clinking. He saw the expensive champagne bubbling. He saw the smiles of the vipers as they circled him. He felt no fear. He felt the calm of a man who had balanced the ledger and found the error. He was not just throwing a party. He was convening a shareholder meeting for the dissolution of a fraudulent enterprise. The invitations were sent. The pawns were moving into position. And the king, disguised as a fool, was ready to topple the board. The great hall of the Silverleaf estate glittered under the light of 3 crystal chandeliers, each prism refracting the lie that Arthur Pendleton had lived for 30 years. It was Saturday evening, and the air smelled of expensive perfume, roast duck, and imminent betrayal. Arthur sat in a wheelchair he did not need, parked near the grand staircase like a piece of antique furniture that no one quite knew what to do with but felt obligated to keep. He had insisted on the chair that morning, telling Eleanor his legs felt like lead, a final flourish to his performance of the invalid. Eleanor descended the stairs, a vision in emerald silk that clung to her preserved figure. She wore the diamond necklace Arthur had bought her for their 10th anniversary, the stones resting cold against her throat. She moved through the crowd of 50 guests with the grace of a queen greeting her subjects, accepting compliments on the decor and offering sad, brave smiles when people asked about Arthur. To the casual observer, she was the devoted wife holding her family together. To Arthur, watching from beneath heavy eyelids, she was a spider weaving the final strands of her web. Dr. Julian Thorne arrived 10 minutes late, his wife Sarah trailing behind him in a modest beige dress that seemed to fade into the wallpaper. Julian wore a tuxedo that fit him a little too perfectly, likely tailored with the money he had siphoned from Arthur's accounts. He strode over to Eleanor, kissing her hand with a familiarity that lingered a second too long for propriety. Arthur saw Sarah look away, her expression one of resigned exhaustion. She did not know the specifics, but she knew she was losing her husband to the woman in the emerald dress. Sheriff Jim Miller stood by the bar, nursing a club soda. He looked uncomfortable in his suit, his eyes scanning the room with the restless habit of a lawman. He caught Arthur's eye across the room. There was no wave, no smile, just a barely perceptible nod. It was the acknowledgement of a man who had seen the file Arthur had sent via courier earlier that afternoon. The file contained the toxicology report, the bank transfers, and the video footage. Miller was not here to celebrate. He was here to ensure the peace was kept when the war began. Lucas hovered near Arthur, his knee bouncing nervously. He checked his watch every 30 seconds. He looked sweaty, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting a lone shark to burst through the front door. He leaned down to Arthur, his breath smelling of scotch and mints. "Dad, are you okay?" Lucas whispered, his voice tight. "Remember the speech? The papers are ready in the library." Arthur looked up at the man who was 99.9% Julian Thorne. He offered a weak, trembling smile. "Yes, son. I remember. The speech. I want to make you proud." "You will, Dad," Lucas said, patting Arthur's shoulder with a hand that felt damp. "Just stick to the script. Hand over the reins. Then you can rest." Rest. That was their favored word for him. It sounded so peaceful, so final. The partners from the law firm arrived, looking serious and expensive. Henderson, Blackwell, and Stein shook Arthur's hand with the gentle condescension reserved for the formerly powerful. They treated him like a child, speaking slowly and loudly. "Good to see you, Arthur," Henderson boomed. "Eleanor tells us you have an announcement." Arthur nodded, letting his head loll slightly to the side. "Big changes, Bob. Big changes. The future is coming." Eleanor clapped her hands, drawing the room's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. Dinner will be served shortly, but first, our dear friend Dr. Thorne would like to propose a toast to the birthday boy." Julian stepped into the center of the room, raising a glass of champagne. The light caught the liquid, turning it gold. He smiled at Arthur, a smile of pure, predatory triumph. To Arthur, Julian began, his voice smooth as oil. "A titan of industry, a loving father, and a husband who has provided a life of comfort and joy for his beautiful wife. We have watched Arthur fight a brave battle against time these past few years. It is heartbreaking to see the mind fade, but the heart remains. To Arthur, on his 75th birthday. May he find the peace he so richly deserves." To Arthur, the room echoed. Arthur raised his own glass, filled with sparkling cider because Julian had forbidden him alcohol due to the medication. He watched Eleanor beam at Julian. He watched Lucas gulp down his drink. He watched Sarah Thorne stare at the floor. Arthur brought the glass to his lips but did not drink. He poured the liquid into the potted ficus beside his wheelchair when no one was looking. He would not give them the satisfaction of drugging him one last time. The tension in the room was a physical weight, pressing down on Arthur's chest. They were all waiting. Eleanor was waiting for the trust fund. Lucas was waiting for the power of attorney. Julian was waiting for Arthur to die so he could move into the master bedroom. Arthur gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. His knuckles were white, but his hands were steady. He felt the weight of the microphone Lucas had placed in his lap. It was heavy, like a gavel. "It is time for the speech, Dad," Lucas hissed, grabbing the handles of the wheelchair. "Let us get you up on the stage." Lucas pushed him toward the small raised platform at the end of the hall. The wheels hummed against the marble floor. Arthur looked at the faces blurring past him. He saw pity. He saw greed. He saw indifference. He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and touched the cold metal of the flash drive containing the evidence. He touched the folded copy of the new will. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the lilies Eleanor had ordered, flowers that were traditionally used for funerals. Lucas locked the brakes of the wheelchair on the stage. He handed Arthur the microphone. "You got this, old man," Lucas whispered, stepping back to stand beside Eleanor and Julian. They formed a tableau of victory, 3 vultures perched on a branch, waiting for the animal to take its final breath. Arthur tapped the microphone. Feedback squealed, silencing the room. He looked out at the sea of faces. He let his jaw hang open for a moment, let his eyes wander vacantly. He saw Eleanor nudge Julian and smirk. Then, Arthur sat up. He straightened his spine. He adjusted his tie with a sharp, precise movement. The vacancy left his eyes, replaced by the cold, hard glint of polished steel. He looked directly at Eleanor. The smirk vanished from her face as she realized, with a sudden, dawning horror, that the man in the wheelchair was not the husband she had drugged. Arthur brought the microphone to his lips. His voice did not tremble. It did not waver. It boomed through the hall with the authority of a judge passing sentence. "Good evening, everyone," Arthur said. "Thank you for coming to my funeral. I am afraid, however, that the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." The silence that followed Arthur's words was not the silence of a library, it was the silence of a bomb shelter in the second before impact. The glass in Julian Thorne's hand tilted precariously. Eleanor's smile froze into a rictus of confusion. Lucas took a step forward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled onto dry land. Arthur did not give them a moment to recover. He stood up from the wheelchair. He did not struggle. He did not wobble. He rose with a smooth, controlled power that seemed impossible for a man who had spent the last hour playing the invalid. He kicked the brake release with the heel of his shoe, sending the wheelchair rolling backward off the low stage with a clatter that echoed like a gunshot. He walked to the podium, his steps firm, his posture commanding. He looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze sweeping over the shocked guests before landing squarely on the trio of conspirators. "For 3 years, I have been dying," Arthur began, his voice resonant and clear, devoid of the tremor that had defined him for months. "Or so I was told. I was told my mind was failing. I was told my hands shook because of a degenerative disease. I was told I needed special tea, special vitamins, special care from a loving wife and a dedicated doctor." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Eleanor's face drained of color, leaving her looking like a wax doll melting under the heat of the stage lights. Julian took a step back, his eyes darting toward the exit. Lucas looked like he was about to vomit. "But I am a man of numbers," Arthur continued. And the numbers did not add up. A man does not lose his mind while his bank accounts lose millions. A man does not develop tremors that vanish the moment he stops drinking the tea prepared by his wife. A man does not forget the faces of his friends while remembering the exact date his life insurance policy vests. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the toxicology report. He held it up for the room to see. "This is a report from Dr. Silas Vance, dated April 14th. It confirms the presence of arsenic and a cocktail of sedatives in my bloodstream. Poison, ladies and gentlemen. Administered daily. In my coffee. In my soup. In the very wine my doctor prescribed for my heart." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah Thorne covered her mouth with her hand. Sheriff Miller stepped forward from the shadows near the bar, his hand resting casually near his hip. Arthur turned to Julian. You prescribed me death, Julian. Slowly. Painfully. You wanted me gone by October 12th. My 75th birthday. Because that is when the trust resets. That is when you and Eleanor could take control without a fight. He turned to Eleanor. And you, my dear. You watched me fade. You held my hand while I shook from the poison you fed me. You told me you loved me while you planned my funeral. You even picked out the flowers. Lilies. I hate lilies, Eleanor. You know that. Eleanor found her voice then. It was a shrill, desperate sound. He is confused. It is the dementia. He is having an episode. Julian, do something. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but Arthur cut him off with a glare that could have frozen fire. Sit down, Julian. Or I will have the sheriff explain the chemical composition of the blue pills you gave me. The ones I kept. The ones I had analyzed. Julian sank into a chair, defeated. Arthur turned his gaze to Lucas. The young man was trembling now, for real this time. And you, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to the back of the room. My son. My legacy. You asked for power of attorney. You wanted to manage my assets. You wanted to protect me. Arthur pulled a second document from his pocket. It was the DNA report. I raised you, Lucas. I taught you to ride a bike. I paid for your mistakes. I loved you more than my own life. But you are not my son. The room went deadly still. Lucas stared at Arthur, his face a mask of horror. You are Julian's son, Arthur said, pointing a steady finger at the doctor. A product of an affair that started long before I met your mother. A cuckoo bird laid in my nest. A fraud from the moment of conception. Arthur looked at the crowd again. He saw the shock, the disgust, the pity shifting from him to the three people on stage. So, tonight, I am granting your wish, Lucas. I am signing a document. He pulled the new will from his inside pocket. He placed it on the podium and uncapped his pen. But it is not a power of attorney. It is a revocation. I am liquidating the trust. I am dissolving the estate. The house you are standing in has been sold. The accounts you have been draining have been frozen. The future you were banking on has been canceled. He signed the document with a flourish, the scratch of the pen loud in the silent room. I am leaving you nothing, Arthur said, looking at the three of them. Not a cent. Not a memory. Not even my name. You wanted my life. You can have the ruin that is left of it. He capped the pen and put it back in his pocket. Happy birthday to me, Arthur said. He stepped back from the podium. The spell broke. The room erupted into chaos. Eleanor screamed, a feral sound of rage and despair. She lunged for Arthur, her nails hooked like claws. You old fool. You ruined everything. But she never reached him. Sheriff Miller was there in an instant, stepping between them. He caught her wrists easily. That is enough, Mrs. Pendleton, Miller said, his voice calm and authoritative. You are under arrest. Arthur watched them. He watched Eleanor struggle. He watched Julian weep into his hands. He watched Lucas stare at the floor, broken. He felt a profound sense of peace. The performance was over. The fool had left the building. And the auditor had closed the books. The commotion caused by Sheriff Miller restraining Eleanor was loud, but Arthur Pendleton raised a hand, commanding silence with the authority of a conductor bringing an orchestra to a halt. He did not look at his wife, whose wrists were now firmly gripped by the lawman. Instead, he looked toward the back of the room where Marcus Cole, the private investigator, stood next to a covered equipment rake. Arthur nodded once. "In my profession," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the stunned crowd, "we have a saying. If it is not documented, it did not happen. Tonight, I am afraid, everything happened." The lights in the great hall dimmed, plunging the room into a twilight gloom. A motorized screen descended from the ceiling behind the podium, a feature usually reserved for Lucas's failed business presentations. A beam of light sliced through the darkness, and the massive white canvas flickered to life. The image was crystal clear. It was the Pendleton living room, dated 3 weeks prior. The timestamp in the corner read 10:14 p.m. The guests gasped as they saw Julian Thorne enter the frame, not with a medical bag, but with a bottle of Arthur's rare scotch. They watched, mesmerized and horrified, as Eleanor rose from the sofa to greet him. The kiss that followed was projected in high definition, 20 feet tall. It was grotesque in its clarity, a betrayal amplified to cinema scale. Someone in the back of the room dropped a glass. It shattered, but no one looked down. Arthur stood to the side of the screen, acting as the narrator of his own tragedy. "Exhibit A," Arthur said coldly. "The consultation. Here we see my loving wife and my dedicated doctor discussing my treatment plan." On screen, the audio boomed through the surround sound speakers. "He is asleep. I gave him the double dose. He will be out until noon tomorrow, Julian Thorne, who had slumped into his chair, covered his face with his hands. Beside him, his wife Sarah sat frozen, her face drained of all blood, staring at the screen as if watching a car crash in slow motion. The video cut to a new scene. It was the kitchen. The morning of the $50,000 check. Arthur appeared on screen, shaking, spilling his juice. The guests watched the performance, seeing now what they had not seen then, the calculated clumsiness. Then, Arthur left the room. Lucas entered. "The old fool," Lucas's voice sneered from the speakers, magnified and distorted. "He is losing it. I need 50,000. The shark is going to break my legs, On screen, Eleanor laughed. "Just get him to sign it. He does not even know what day it is, In the present, Lucas let out a strangled sound, half sob, half growl. He looked around wildly, realizing that every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on him with a mixture of disgust and fascination. But Arthur was not finished. The screen changed again. This time, it was a static image. A document. The logo of Genety Cork Solutions was visible at the top. "Exhibit B," Arthur announced. "The biological audit." The text on the screen was large enough for even the nearsighted partners from the law firm to read without their glasses. Probability of paternity, 0.0%. A collective intake of breath sucked the oxygen out of the room. And for the sake of completeness, Arthur continued, clicking a remote in his hand. The image shifted. Alleged father, Julian Thorne. Child, Lucas Pendleton. Probability of paternity, 99.9%, The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. Sarah Thorne stood up. She looked at the screen, then down at the top of Julian's head, and finally at Lucas. The resemblance, once hidden by the context of their separate lives, was now undeniable. The nose. The chin. The posture. It was all there, projected in brutal black and white. "Julian," Sarah whispered. Her voice was barely audible, yet it seemed to echo in the silence. Julian did not look up. He could not. Sarah swayed. Her eyes rolled back, and she crumpled. She hit the floor with a soft thud, a pile of beige fabric and broken trust. Two waiters rushed to her side, fanning her, checking her pulse. Arthur did not move to help. He felt a pang of sympathy, but it was distant, like reading about a disaster in a newspaper. Sarah was collateral damage. A necessary casualty in the war for truth. He clicked the remote one final time. "Exhibit C," Arthur said. The toxicology report. The screen filled with the jagged graphs and chemical analysis from Dr. Vance. The words arsenic and midazolam were highlighted in red. "Systematic poisoning," Arthur explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "Attempted murder. Conspiracy to commit homicide for financial gain." The dates of the highest toxicity levels correspond perfectly with the wire transfers from my joint account to a shell company in Nevada. A company owned by Julian Thorne. He turned to the crowd, spreading his hands. "You came here tonight to celebrate a birthday. You came to say goodbye to a dying old man. Instead, I give you this. The truth. Naked. Ugly. Irrefutable." Eleanor, still held by the sheriff, stopped struggling. She stared at the screen, her eyes wide and glassy. She realized there was no charm, no lie, no manipulation that could talk her way out of high-definition video and forensic science. She went limp, sagging against Miller's grip, a marionette whose strings had been cut. Lucas, however, panicked. The fight-or-flight response flooded his system, and he chose flight. He saw the guests distracted by Sarah's fainting spell. He saw his mother incapacitated. He saw a gap between two waiters near the service entrance. "I did not know." Lucas screamed, his voice cracking. "They made me do it. I did not know about the poison." He bolted. He shoved a heavy-set woman in a blue dress aside and sprinted toward the kitchen doors. Arthur watched him run. He did not shout. He did not chase. He simply watched, knowing that he had accounted for this variable too. Lucas hit the swinging doors with his shoulder, bursting into the kitchen. But he did not make it far. Blocking his path was a wall of black fabric. A private security guard, hired by Marcus Cole, stood there with arms crossed. Behind him were two more. Lucas skidded to a halt, turning to run back, but Marcus Cole stepped out from behind the projector screen, blocking the return path. "Going somewhere, son?" Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous. Lucas backed up, trapped between the security team and the room full of witnesses. He looked at Arthur, pleading with his eyes. "Dad, please. I am your son. You raised me." Arthur looked down from the podium. He looked at the young man he had bounced on his knee, the boy he had taught to drive, the man who had called him an old fool on a recording played for 50 people. Arthur shook his head slowly. "I have no son," Arthur said. He turned back to the sheriff. "Sheriff Miller, I believe you have seen enough. Please remove these trespassers from my property." The party was over. The guests stood in stunned silence as the machinery of justice, lubricated by Arthur's meticulous planning, began to grind the conspirators into dust. The screen behind Arthur went black, but the images it had shown were burned into the retinas of everyone present, a permanent record of the night the fool played the king. The heavy double doors of the grand hall swung open, admitting a gust of warm night air and 4 uniformed deputies who had been waiting in the driveway like silent sentinels. Sheriff Miller nodded to them, a gesture that set the machinery of the state into motion. The handcuffs came out, the metallic ratchet sound cutting through the stunned silence of the room, louder and more final than the popping of any champagne cork. Lucas Pendleton was the first to fall. 2 deputies grabbed him by the arms, forcing them behind his back. He thrashed, his face slick with sweat and tears, looking for an escape that did not exist. "Get off me!" Lucas shrieked, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "I did nothing wrong. It was a loan. He gave me the money." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He read from it with the monotone delivery of a man who had seen too many ruined lives to be surprised by one more. "Lucas Pendleton, you are under arrest for wire fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. Specifically, the solicitation of $50,000 under false pretenses regarding a non-existent business venture in Singapore. We traced the funds, son. They went straight to a blackened account in Las Vegas. That is a federal crime. I can pay it back." Lucas begged, looking at Arthur. "Dad, tell them. I will pay it back." Arthur stood on the podium, looking down at the young man. He adjusted his cufflinks. "The bank is closed, Lucas," Arthur said softly. "Permanently." Next was Julian Thorne. The doctor did not resist. He stood up slowly, his face the color of ash. He looked at his unconscious wife, Sarah, who was being attended to by the paramedics who had just arrived. He looked at Arthur. "You ruined me," Julian whispered hoarsely as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. "My practice. My reputation." "You ruined yourself, Julian," Arthur replied, his voice devoid of pity. "I just audited the results. You are under arrest for attempted murder in the first degree, medical malpractice, and insurance fraud. The medical board has already been notified. By tomorrow morning, you will not even be allowed to put a band-aid on a scraped knee." Finally, they came for Eleanor. She did not go quietly. She fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, digging her heels into the expensive Persian rug. Her emerald dress bunched up, ruining the perfect silhouette she had spent hours curating. "Get your hands off me!" She screamed at the deputies. "I am Eleanor Pendleton. This is my house. You cannot do this to me in my own house." Sheriff Miller tightened his grip on her arm, not unkindly, but with firmness. "Actually, Mrs. Pendleton," Arthur interjected, his voice slicing through her hysteria. "That is not entirely accurate." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a single, folded document. He held it up. "This is a bill of sale," Arthur announced. "Dated yesterday. I sold this estate to a blind trust based in the Cayman Islands. The transaction closed at 4 o'clock this afternoon. Technically, Eleanor, you are trespassing on private corporate property." Eleanor stopped struggling. She stared at him, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The mansion, the sanctuary, the symbol of her status, it was gone. Vaporized by a signature she hadn't even known about. Where will I go?" she whispered, the fight draining out of her. Arthur looked at her. He looked at the woman he had loved for 30 years. He looked for a spark of the wife who had once nursed him through the flu, the woman who had laughed at his bad jokes. But all he saw was a stranger who had poisoned his tea. "I believe the county jail provides housing," Arthur said. "And after that, Well, I hear the winters in prison are quite long. Sheriff Miller nodded to his deputies. Take them away. The procession began. The three conspirators were marched out of the Great Hall, past the shocked faces of their friends, their colleagues, and the social elite of Arizona. They were paraded past the buffet of roast duck and truffles they would never eat, past the champagne tower that stood as a monument to a celebration that never happened. Lucas wept openly, a sound of pure, selfish misery. Julian stared straight ahead, a dead man walking. Eleanor looked back one last time. She looked at Arthur standing on the podium, bathed in the spotlight, looking not like a frail old man, but like a titan carved from granite. "Arthur, please." She cried out, her voice breaking. Arthur did not flinch. He did not turn away. He watched them until they were through the doors. He watched the flashing red and blue lights of the cruisers wash over the walls of the entry hall, painting the room in the colors of emergency. When the doors finally closed, sealing the night and the noise outside, a heavy silence descended on the room. The guests stood frozen, unsure of protocol. Was the party over? Should they leave? Should they applaud? Arthur stepped down from the podium. He walked over to Marcus Cole, who was packing up the projector. "Good work, Mr. Cole," Arthur said quietly. Cole nodded. "A pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Pendleton." Arthur turned to the room. He saw the partners from the law firm huddled together, whispering furiously. He saw the socialites clutching their pearls. He felt a sudden, overwhelming exhaustion. Not the lethargy of the poison, but the deep, bone-weary tiredness of a man who had just dismantled his entire life with his own hands. He walked to the bar and poured himself a glass of water. His hand was steady. He took a sip. It was cool and clean. It tasted of nothing, and to Arthur, that was the finest flavor in the world. He looked around the grand room one last time. It was just a building now. Wood and stone and velvet. It held no ghosts. The demons had been exorcised, carried away in the back of a police car. "Go home, everyone," Arthur said to the room, his voice soft but carrying. "The show is over. The curtain has fallen. And the actors have left the stage." He turned and walked toward the French doors that led to the garden, leaving the guests to whisper amongst themselves. He needed fresh air. He needed to breathe the night air of a world where he was alone, yes, but alive. And for the first time in years, truly, completely awake. 3 months had passed since the night the lights went out at Silverleaf. The arid heat of Arizona was a distant memory, replaced by the crisp, pine-scented air of Montana. Arthur Pendleton sat in a folding chair on the edge of a glassy lake, a fishing rod resting easily in hands that were as steady as the mountains reflected in the water. The tremors were gone, flushed out of his system along with the arsenic and the lies. At 72 years old, he felt a vitality he had not known in a decade. He reached for his tablet lying on the cooler beside him. The screen glowed with the morning headlines from Phoenix. The trial had been swift, a mercy granted only because the evidence was so overwhelming. The headline read, "Silverleaf conspirators sentenced." Arthur read the details with the detachment of a man reading about a storm in a foreign country. Eleanor Pendleton and Dr. Julian Thorne had received sentences of 25 years to life for attempted murder and conspiracy. Lucas Pendleton, the young man who had once called him father, was sentenced to 10 years for wire fraud and grand larceny. The judge had been unyielding, citing the calculated cruelty of their scheme. Arthur set the tablet down. He looked out at the water. He had liquidated everything. The house, the cars, the investments. The proceeds were now sitting safely in a charitable trust, with a modest portion set aside to ensure his own quiet comfort for the rest of his days. He was alone in the wilderness, but for the first time in 30 years, he was not lonely. He had lost a family, yes, but it was a family built on sand. In the silence of the mountains, he had found something far more valuable. He had found his dignity. He had found the truth. And most importantly, he had found himself. The ledger was finally balanced. The liabilities had been written off. The assets, his life, his sanity, his future, were secure. He reeled in his line, checking the bait. A small smile played on his lips. He was no longer the fool. He was the survivor. This story of Arthur Pendleton serves as a powerful reminder that trust is a currency that should never be spent blindly. We often believe that those closest to us have our best interests at heart, but as Arthur discovered, even the most intimate relationships can hide the darkest intentions. The lesson here is not to live in fear or suspicion, but to remain vigilant. True love and loyalty do not fear scrutiny. They do not hide in the shadows or rely on deception. Arthur's journey teaches us that it is never too late to reclaim your power, to stand up for your dignity, and to demand the truth, no matter how painful it may be. It reminds us that our worth is not defined by how easily we are fooled, but by the strength we show when we finally see the light. If this story of justice and redemption resonated with you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Hitting that like button and sharing this video with your friends and family helps us bring you more compelling stories every single day. We are building a community of storytellers and listeners, and your support means the world to us. We would love to hear your thoughts on Arthur's decision. Do you think his revenge was justified, or was it too harsh? Have you ever faced a situation where your trust was betrayed, and how did you handle it? Please share your experiences and feelings in the comments section below. We read every single one and cherish the opportunity to connect with you on a deeper level. Your insights bring these stories to life and help us all learn from one another. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. We wish you nothing but the best in your own life. May you be blessed with vibrant health, endless joy, and a peace that surpasses all understanding each and every day. Stay safe, stay strong, and keep seeking the truth. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in the next video.